Presentations for the session. First one is on Myanmar's foreign policy trajectory in the post 2021 proof period, balancing China and the US, which will be presented by Deepanita Maria Bang. She is a PhD scholar at the Department of Political Science, NIAS, Shillong. Deepanita, forward to you. You have 6 plus 2, 8 minutes for your presentation.
Okay, thank you so much for extending this opportunity to me. I'll share my screen. Please let me know if you can see it. Okay, I hope you can see it. Okay, so that's my presentation, Myanmar's foreign policy trajectory in the post-2021 coup period. I'm looking at balancing China and the US, and by balancing, I'm not looking at the theoretical aspect, but the pretty literal term balancing two countries, great powers in international relations. Okay. So the overall abstract of this presentation is Myanmar's foreign policy after the 2021 military coup reflects a dual track approach. The Tamado's engagement with regional powers for support, while the exiled NUG seeks international legitimacy from especially Western nations. While it is understood that the 2017 Rohingya crisis, followed by the 2021 military coup and the ensuing civil war, has severely constrained the country's diplomatic maneuverability within an increasingly hostile international environment, closer scrutiny of their foreign policy reflects a bifurcated diplomatic landscape in Myanmar, and this challenges the traditional understanding about weak states' behavior in international order. Instead of either bandwagoning, the theoretical bandwagoning that we see mostly in Southeast Asian nations, and the dominant regional, between the two dominant regional powers, or attempting outright balancing act, Myanmar's post-coup foreign policy demonstrates how even politically isolated states and fragile, weak states um, execute nuanced diplomatic strategies to maintain their autonomy, strategic flexibility. Okay. The developments that we see in the post-coup, post-2020 coup period is that the sanctions from the US and Western allies and Myanmar's renewed pariah status have severely constrained the country's strategic options. On the one hand, the Tatmadaws, which is the Myanmar military's State Administration Council, has demonstrated unexpected diplomatic dexterity, particularly in managing its relations with the larger neighbor China. Rather than simply acquiescing to the asymmetric powerful neighbor, NAPIDO, and here I mean the SSC, State Administration Council, has pursued a sophisticated and vigorous hedging strategy by cultivating relationships with Russia, Japan, India, and Thailand. These are very vital states, especially in the neighborhood. This diversification of diplomatic ties counterbalances Beijing's influence and fills the void that has been left by Western disengagement, especially after the 2017 Rohingya patriation. On the one hand, the exiled National Unity Government has secured growing international legitimacy, again, particularly in the West, as you see it. The literature is largely drawn from this paper is an extension of my doctoral research, which looks at China and US contestation in Myanmar during the period of transition, which is roughly 2011 to 20. However, recent literature that have also inspired this paper are the works of Passeri on Myanmar's post-coup foreign policy alignment behavior, and some of the theoretical papers by Skindler and Braun and Hay, which reflect the role of small states and in managing their agency, especially in international relations. Okay. I have not outlined conclusions. Rather, I have outlined some of the working concerns, the concerns that I'm looking at, and I have identified three. One is that the contrasting diplomatic strategies between the SSC and the National Unity Government for legitimacy has failed to address Myanmar's economic, socio-political, humanitarian, environmental concerns internationally. Both the agents have failed to echo the voices of the people in a holistic manner. They do reflect it, but in a very fragmented nature. Second is the dual track approach complicates the international community's response, including humanitarian response, leading to polarized reaction and challenges in navigating legitimacy claims from both the governments. And finally, on the one hand, we see the SSC's diplomatic, maneuverability, which faces sustainability challenges amid questionable territorial control, while on the other hand, the NUG faces legitimacy challenges, especially within the powerful ethnic armed organizations, as we have, seen some excellent presentations in the morning. which is internally, and the immediate neighboring countries like Bangladesh, India, which do not outrightly engage only with the NUG. So, and amid this, and this is again a global perspective, when you come closer to the regional, at the regional level to have a closer view, then we look at the emergence of multiple stakeholders, more stakeholders rather. There is civil society organizations, definitely borderland communities, because again India shares a very closer a 1643-kilometer long border. But then we also see the role of ethnic armed organizations, ethnic revolutionary organizations, and very recently again we see factions within these organizations like the Chin groups and the developments in the Kayin state. Okay. Some of the recommendations, drawing from, I think, the closing remarks yesterday, I have identified two, recommendations. One is Myanmar experience reveals a crucial paradox in modern geopolitics, which is international isolation can sometimes create opportunities for diplomatic diversifications. Since 2021, the SSC has adeptly exploited these rivalries between major powers, particularly China and the US, while engaging with regional actors simultaneously. By playing these various interests against each other, the SEC has managed to maintain a degree of maneuverability despite widespread international condemnation. Their ability to secure military and economic support from multiple sources, even under severe sanctions from others, exemplifies how absence of a unified global approach, especially in the growing push for multipolarity, the growing China-US contestation, and the norm polysemy, which is differentiated and localized understanding of international norms of governance, enable even diplomatically constrained states like Myanmar to find space within these for their strategic autonomy. This dynamic challenges traditional assumptions, and states should cautiously navigate in engaging with or both the SSC and the NUG. The second recommendation again would be a path to stability in Myanmar lies not in quick fixes but in fostering an inclusive dialogue that brings all the voices to the table. By engaging the Myanmar's multiple stakeholders, neighboring countries and international organizations can help forge lasting solutions that address the root cause of conflict. Despite it may take longer dialogues or years or a very prolonged period in implementation, but this should be a way forward. This patient comprehensive approach ultimately serves everyone's interest, even national interest of neighboring states, which are more impacted by the developments in Myanmar. As a stable democratic Myanmar would strengthen regional security, facilitate economic growth, especially borderland cross border trade, and stem the flow of refugees and transnational crime. This the alternative, which is pursuing short-term tactical gains, like we have seen recently, especially in China, and some of our presenters in the morning have highlighted how the Three Brotherhood Alliance was being negotiated by China. We also see that while we ignore countries for short-term tactical gains, ignore the broader needs for Myanmar's people, the risks perpetuate a cycle of instability that will continue to threaten regional stability. With this, I would like to thank you, and I'm open to questions and suggestions. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Deepa, for that presentation. The question and answer session will be held at the end of the.
Yes, thank you.
Our next presentation is on China's engagement in post-coup Myanmar, interest, influence, and instability by Chetan Singh Rana from CIPOD Chain New Delhi. Forward to you, Chetan.
Good morning, everyone. I'll just share my slides. There's just like a couple of them, actually. All right. Are they visible?
Yes.
Perfect. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Sorry. And thank you for including me in this amazing conclave. I've been working on Myanmar for since 2019, when I first took a course on Indo-Pacific by Professor Shankari Sundararaman. And since then, I've been really interested in this area. And even though my PhD thesis is on an entirely different topic, I've been working on Myanmar constantly. So what I'm focusing on is the China's engagement in the post-coup Myanmar. And there are three pillars of this analysis. One is the interests of China. Second is the influence that it has across different stakeholders. And third is how it's trying to manage the instability. And while we were asked to keep the PPT very short and crisp, so I'll just like to share there are two major theoretical angles that I'm looking at while understanding China's engagement with Myanmar. One was a very recent paper by David Brenner, who argues about misunderstanding Myanmar and how the US and the West generally misunderstands Myanmar and how Myanmar should be studied as a method. He develops on Asia as a method mechanism and argues that even for Myanmar, we should understand Myanmar as a method and as a field of study altogether. The second framework that I'm using is what we call the hedging strategy. Generally, it's used to analyze international politics between different states. But even in case of China's engagement domestically in Myanmar, we see they're using a strategy similar to what's called hedging, right? Where it's engaging with different actors in the same field of action to manage its risks and its interests, right? So, a very brief history of China's engagement with Myanmar, because in yesterday's talk, there was a very interesting question by one of the discussants that, why does China have this great influence in Myanmar? And the answer, as to so many things, always lies in the history, right? So, uh, the diplomatic recognition was very quick after both, like Myanmar got independence and China was established as PRC. And uh, the first decade of relationships was very stable between the UNO government and the PRC. The border agreement was settled in 1960, and as it may surprise to a lot of people today, that border agreement was actually settled in favor of Myanmar and not really China. The the issues in relationships emerged when Ne Wen conducted the coup in 1962, because Ne Wen followed this policy of Burmanization, right, which kicked out a lot of Chinese businesses and Chinese diaspora out of Myanmar, and similar with Indian diaspora in Myanmar as well, right? And Ne Wen also followed a policy of international isolation, right? It was very inward looking. And this was the period which also was coincided with the Sino-Soviet split, where the Communist Party of Burma sided with China, whereas the USSR government actually supported Ne Wen's government, right? So there were a lot of different working tools that came together, and the fissure between the PRC and the Burmese state at that point under Ne Wen, the fissure became larger and larger, right? It was after the passing of Mao uh, that normalization started to happen under Deng Xiaoping, who gradually cut off the support from CPB, and then CPB suffered from internal splinter groups, and their military might in certain regions also decreased, right? So that was the period when they started shifting towards the Tatmadaw or the Siddhat and the military regime. The final push that that created the Pokpo relationship between China and Myanmar, as it's known, the fraternal relationship, was after the 1988 election and the protests that happened. Uh, just before the protests and elections, there was an agreement signed between China and Myanmar that sort of normalized relationships. But after the protests, there was a there was a flurry of Western sanctions that effectively pushed Myanmar towards China, because that was the only state at that point that was ready to engage with Myanmar. Even for a brief period, around that period, even India decided to not engage with Myanmar, right? And that is a period where the fundamentals for this relationship are established between the Tatmadaw, which has been historically critical of China, because the Tatmadaw and its policy in Myanmar is uh, largely stems from its insecurity of territorial integrity. Right, the Tatmadaw believes that a federal Myanmar cannot exist. It needs to have a unitary power at the center which controls the whole of Myanmar. Right, so this insecurity with an aggressive China, right? It does not gel well, but that was the practical solution at that period, right? And then we see when Myanmar gradually moved towards democracy, we see that during the Thein Sein government, even though Myanmar-China relations were at its highest, uh, they used the public sentiment against China to actually suspend the Myeotson dam construction. There was a copper mine agreement that was suspended. So there was a cutback during the Thein Sein government, right? But in the similar period, Aung San Suu Kyi's engagement with the Chinese government increased. And when the NLD came into power, that was actually seen by China as a favorable outcome, because now they had a government in Naypyidaw on which they could trust, they could engage with, and was far more reliable than the Tatmadaw, which was again an undemocratic, relatively not so. They would use the public sentiment as and when it worked for them, but not generally. So China's strategy. Uh, this is one slide. So interests, people like to segregate them in domestic interests, economic interests, strategic interests, political interests. I believe they're not watertight compartments and they all flow into each other, right? Um, Tan Min-yu has always argued that China's policy, primarily in Myanmar, emerges from its need to develop the Yunnan province. And that is where the whole the core interest lies in when it comes to engagement with Myanmar. That yes, it serves a great game agenda of access to Indian Ocean, overcoming Malacca dilemma, having access to Cocos Island, developing deep sea port in Kyokpo in Rakhine region, or having access to Yangon port as well. But at its base, it's about having stability in the Yunnan region, uh, curbing the illicit drug trade uh, from the Shan state, and having a level of security for along the borders, because whenever there is an increase in violence across the border state, there's a flux of refugees that move across the Myanmar Chinese border into China's Yunnan province, which the government in Beijing does not see favorably. Right now, uh, coming to the third pillar, instability. So a lot of analysis out there believes that the crisis in Myanmar is actually an opportunity for China, because it effectively pushes Myanmar into the lap of China again, because the military junta has been uh, has been ostracized by the international system, and it's basically an opportunity for China to install a puppet regime in junta. And what they fail to often analyze is the impact on the day-to-day basis on the Chinese investments in Myanmar. The investments amount to billions of dollars, which have been effectively are in a limbo. Even though the projects haven't been suspended, they are in a limbo. And Professor Shankri was discussing yesterday how the Chinese have effectively brought on boots on ground to protect these investments. Right now, the thing is, what now here comes the main theoretical intervention, is that, as we were talking about, West approach to Myanmar, or generally the US approach to other crises in the world, is the regime change theory. What China prefers is the regime stability theory, whether it was engagement with the Sitthat earlier, with the NLD government, and now in a fragmented Myanmar, right? So regime stability theory does not necessarily mean that they will back the one power at the center. It means that it will back different actors, as long as a certain modus operandi can be developed for it to conduct its activities and policies in Myanmar, right? So that is the regime stability theory that China is sort of pursuing in Myanmar. It does not see that Myanmar will one day again become democratic, will have consolidated nation-state borders, and it will function like any European state. China does not believe that. China believes Myanmar is a unique case in itself, and therefore a uniquely designed policy needs to be pursued in Myanmar, right? And then comes the question of influence. Um, China has great influence over Sitthat, which emerges from its protection of Sitthat at the international level. Even though the NLD ambassador to the UN was able to keep his position, he's been effectively
You have to conclude in a minute.
2 minutes.
In 1 minute.
Yeah, perfect. I won't take more longer than that. So
Okay.
this protected them internationally, especially after the arrest warrants were issued for junta leaders. It has great party-to-party relations with the NLD, and it continues to engage with the NLD. When it comes to the influence over ethnic armed organizations, there are over 100 ethnic armed organizations, but there are effectively 10 to 20 ethnic armed organizations which control about 80% of the conflicted region, right? And China has a great influence over them. China was basically the broker for the Panglong Conference, which eventually led to the National Ceasefire Agreement. And therefore, uh, people tend to assume that these are mere puppets of China, but they actually even conduct operations against China, right? So, in certain battlefields, China is supporting the junta, and certain other battlefields, it's supporting the EAOs, right? The biggest drawback for the China after the coup has been the anti-China sentiment that has again emerged in Myanmar, and that is largely because of the international backing that China gives to the Sittard, right? So again, this presentation or this research does not really answer a lot of questions. It just basically tries to lay out a complex paradigm that Myanmar is and how complexity can only be resolved by a more complex approach. And that reflects in China's policy. It's not going to be uh, it's hard to measure success or failure of this policy because it's working in different sectors with different aims, right? And that is basically the purpose of this presentation and this paper, to actually uh, show the complexity and not try to come out with simpler answers. Thank you.
Thank you, Chetan, for that presentation. Thank you once again. We will move on to the third one. Third one is on China's stakes in Myanmar's civil war, preventing conflict spillovers, protecting investment, and gaining regional influence by Femi Francis from Lian's Sheraton. Femi, forward it.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. I'm in a bit of trouble because the scholars before me did an exceptional job in contextualizing. So I knew that would happen. So I've decided that my explanation on this particular topic would be about the concept rather than context. So I won't focus on numbers history because we have done that already. So today I'll be presenting on China's stakes in Myanmar's civil war, and we'll quickly, briefly look into the overview of this conflict. Not going much into it. Since 2021 coup, the military takeover in Myanmar, China was amongst the few countries who recognized this military and did not condemn it. In January, recently it brokered a ceasefire deal between the military and Myanmar National Defense Democratic Alliance Army to halt fighting near the border with China. Now, since the inception of this conflict, China has been a major supporter of junta's army wing by becoming key arms supplier and financial aid. China's state-owned enterprises have been responsible for supplying fighter jets, aircraft, as well as raw materials like copper, aluminium, and steel. Now, China has also showcased tactical support for other actors in this conflict, like the Three Brotherhood Alliance. The presentation was covered by Superno, which was responsible for the Operation 1027, which is a joint resistance movement by the EAG groups. China has showed increased interest in supporting now the opposition National Unity Government, a party consisting of deposed lawyers, MPs, including representatives from 2021 overthrown NLD leaders. Now, this gives us a larger overview of how China is dealing with all the major internal stakeholders in the civil-military conflict. Now, keeping in mind of whatever I said above, my presentation will specifically look at what stakes China has in this conflict and the issues it faces. Next slide. Now, here what I'm showing here, so next slide, sorry, I should have come back. And next slide, we go ahead. So you can see that I've put stakes and issues side by side. By that, what I want to reflect here, and that's something that Chetan did an amazing job to cover. I'm just putting it in another manner, that all of these two variables are not do not exist in monolith. That's what he said, that they're interlinked. So these are concurrent to each other and influence each other. So our first stake that we look into is one of the biggest state, which he also mentioned, is a stable border and a neighbor. Now, China-Myanmar share a border of 2,125 kilometers that run from the tri-point of India in the north to the tri-point with Laos. Now, since the onset of this conflict, it largely supported the junta, but expanded its support to the rebellion because rebellion holds one of the most influence in 11 out of 18 township with near the border. The Special Advisory Council for the Myanmar stated that 86% of the country's territory and 67% of the national population are in township not under stable junta control. So as these are conflicting interests in Myanmar and there is chaos, a stable neighbor is more beneficial. Now, this brings me to my issue that what China sees an issue in this civil war is the conflict spillover. Now, China time and again has expressed concerns regarding the spillover of war into China and its cross-border stability. In 2024, 5 Chinese people were injured after straying artillery shells from Myanmar's Nasang region fell into China. Now, in the context of the same, live fire drills were held at the China-Myanmar border to showcase their reconnaissance abilities and to warn Myanmar's junta and whoever responsible was there in that region that you have to take my border concerns seriously. The second stake is protecting investment. Now, according to the most recent data that I could find, I think so it's 2021 or 2020, China is the biggest trading partner of Myanmar, responsible for 36% of the trade. And China has been investing consistently in physical infrastructure projects under the BRI initiative through China-Myanmar Economic Corridor, which will be covered by NOVA. Several projects under CMEC, for instance, the LNG terminal in Meeling, the Kiangfu Special Economic Zone, Deep Sea Sport. They have shown interest in upgrading the Mandalay Muse Road between from Myanmar to China. In contrast, China's exports to Myanmar are primarily of manufactured goods such as machinery, electronics, and textile. So these are larger investments that they want to protect. So these are the major stakes that they have. The issue that they are facing in this regard is declining of waterlogged investments. Now, post-coup, the conditions have deteriorated as the general public is becoming indigent with China's actions of continuing business as usual with the military regime, as well as shielding it from the international spectators. Now, this has led to a growing aggression over Chinese-led businesses. For instances, there has been increased vandalizing of Chinese companies and individuals during the period of 2021 to 2022. Foreign investments, largely, not just based on China, has fallen in Myanmar since the coup, from it being a 1.64 billion economy to 6.61 million economy in the financial year of 2024. Ruli and Muse of China are one of the biggest example of the repercussion that two countries can face when it comes to conflict. Once it was a booming town where it was a transport hub for the China-Myanmar corridor, but due to this conflict, there has been the town has laid flat, and you can see the direct repercussions of this conflict in this small town. The third stake is maritime access. China has heavily invested in the strategic important Kiangfu Special Economic Zone, and the gas pipeline connecting Rakhine to Yunnan. Now, this special economic zone for China would provide strategically would provide landlocked access to the southwestern province with direct access to the Indian Ocean. And this can be a much cheaper way for them to transport goods. So this can be an alternative for them for the Malacca Strait. The issue is conflict hindering the use of maritime channel. Again, despite the political upheaval, China has insisted on investing in these areas, but the complex array of challenges, including intensified armed conflicts, public opposition, environmental concern, contentious land acquisition process, and economic difficulties makes these investments tougher. The last stake is China's domestic concern. Recently on Chinese social media, there is a growing call of a thorough crackdown on telecom fraud, and China has been increasingly concerned with the prevalence of so-called pig butchering that Nuha talked about, where there has been an illicit economy being run by Chinese criminal syndicates who target Chinese workers and who lure people into Southeast Asia with promises of jobs, only to be kidnapped and taken advantage of. This, which leads me to my issue, which are the scam centers that they have built. Now, these Chinese-led crime networks have been cooperating with various armed groups in China-Myanmar border and even junta. And this has led to the creation of its own economy. In 2023, the number of scammers working in Myanmar was estimated to be 120,000 people, which generated a total revenue of 15.3 billion. So this has also been fueling the economy of in this conflict. Next slide. Okay. I'll quickly move to my perspective. My first perspective is that China is using a multi-pronged approach to Myanmar. China is not a loyalist to anybody in this region. when it comes to Myanmar. It's not limiting its support to the military regime, but rather it has built internal alliances with all the stakeholders. In terms of timeline, there was junta, then it got involved with the EAOs, and then they are also interested in the new political party that is there. So China sees this as an opportunity, and what I concur is that regardless who the actor is, the stake of the investment is the largest priority for all of them. They have made sure that this is their priority, and if they refuse to take care of those, China has used its own way to put pressures by cutting off electricity, by cutting off water supply, or by cutting off supply of ammunition or arms. Now, due to the lag, due to the isolation of Myanmar, this has given China a larger space to play this game. Not game, but to leverage its influence in the region. My second point is that this particular, I'll be done. Two sentences. That there has been a larger pivot towards it being a regional influencer and a global peacemaker. This is something that I have been discussing and following whenever we have a discussion on China, that it no more wants to be subservient and they want to realign itself as a global actor. And you can see that the way that it's been engaging in international conflicts and external civil conflict, which is an international matter, you can see how China wants to play a larger role in this conflict. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Femi, for that presentation. We will move on to the last presentation in the session on China-Myanmar Economic Corridor, Who Wants What and Why, by Nova Karim. He is from the Department of IR.
So just like Femi said, I would also like to add that the previous presenters have covered most of my points and have in a way summarized whatever I wanted to say. But then I'll start. The China-Myanmar Economic Corridor, which I'll refer to as CMEC, is an important part of China's Belt and Road Initiative aimed at enhancing economic ties and infrastructure development between China and Myanmar. It was initially part of the broader Bangladesh, China, India, Myanmar Economic Corridor, but was rebranded and launched in 2017 as an exclusive economic corridor between China and Myanmar. It was formalized with the signing of the 15-point Memorandum of Understanding on 9 September 2018. This initiative covers not only material connectivity such as infrastructure, manufacturing, agriculture, transport, telecommunications, and other technology, but also proposes soft connectivity like human resources development, joint research, and people-to-people engagement. Now, I'd like to present about the CMEC projects in Myanmar, to give you an idea of the region and where it is situated. The Sino-Myanmar oil and gas pipelines, the only fully operational project under CMEC to date, predates the CMEC's official launch. It has been fully operational since 2017. And remarkably, the gas pipeline segment of this oil and gas pipeline project was operational as early as July 2030, 2 months before President Xi Jinping introduced the Silk Road Economic Belt concept in Kazakhstan. The CMEC also includes the controversial Mitsone Dam project, which was suspended by the Union Solidarity and Development Party, USDP, administration in 2011 due to public pressure over environmental concerns and potential damage to the Irrawaddy River. This is Myanmar's longest river and major commercial waterway and a lifeline resource for many communities in the country. The proposed CMEC projects also include among its core projects a transport corridor with highways and high-speed railways, linking the Kyakfu deep sea port in western Myanmar with China's landlocked Yunnan province. The Muse-Mandalay Railway, which is still in its planning stage, cuts across Shan State, home to 7 EAOs, ethnic armed organizations, which is still in active conflict with the government. The first phase of the proposed high-speed railway would connect Kunming and Mandalay, Myanmar's second largest city, while the second phase would expand this network by adding another high-speed railway and highway linking Mandalay with Kyakfu. This transport corridor's strategic significance is further augmented by the existing oil and gas terminals in Kyakfu, connected to Kunming by the completed Sino-Myanmar oil and gas pipelines. Should the transport corridor be completed, it would provide China with a reliable overland access to the Indian Ocean, easing trade flow and reducing reliance on the heavily congested and strategically vulnerable Malacca Strait. Similarly, Kyaukphyu Port, which is in Rakhine State, has also faced several security challenges, including the Rohingya crisis and the intensifications of attacks by the AAA in January 2019. The port along the Bay of Bengal would give industries in and beyond Ruili access to the Indian Ocean and then global markets. The port is also the starting point for oil and gas pipelines that will transport energy via Myanmar to Yunnan. So, I'm talking about four major actors who have a role in the CMAC. The first is China. China intends to accomplish three main objectives with CMAC. First, in terms of geopolitics, China desires direct access to the Indian Ocean through Myanmar to gain unfettered access to both the Indian and Pacific Oceans. Easier access to the Bay of Bengal would allow China an alternative trade route for their supply chain and naval passage instead of going through the heavily congested Malacca Strait. This would in turn allow it to increase its geopolitical influence in Southeast Asia and strengthen its naval presence in the Indian Ocean region. Second, in terms of economics, the CMAC will help promote China's Western development strategy by facilitating trade between Yunnan, Southeast Asia, and South Asia. The CMAC also presents China with the opportunity to extract the abundant natural resources present in Myanmar and manufacture products to improve border trade between the two countries. Third, by harnessing Myanmar's economy and infrastructure to China's, the CMAC projects will move Myanmar into China's orbit of normative power and sphere of influence. So next is the junta government. The current junta government, after to control, faced many sanctions from the West and the international community, leading to the dependence on China. The current conflict has not helped them in any way. So the CMAC is an opportunity for it to increase its economic development, create jobs, and improve infrastructure. By aligning with China, they can fund their military and receive economic aid, which otherwise they will not be able to procure from the international community. The third major actor is the ethnic armed organizations. They currently control most of the areas where the CMAC infrastructure exists or is planned to be built. The United Vast State Army, UNWA, controls many regions in the Shan state, where many infrastructure projects are planned or are ongoing. The Arakan Army, AA, has also control over many regions in the Rakhine state, most importantly the Kyaukphyu port, which is under threat from the EAO, which would seriously affect China's plan for the region. The EAOs also depend upon China for their arms and funding, and the threat of Chinese interference to protect Chinese interests in the region have forced the EAOs to cooperate with China on a certain level. And the fourth actor, I've not found much recent data for the local communities, but I'll present what I have. The local communities, which consist of the civilian population, who mainly engage in agriculture and trade to sustain their livelihoods, the conflict has affected them the most, displacing more than 2 million of the population, with the rest facing famine, persecution, and natural disasters. The local communities have also raised concerns about the environmental and social impacts CMAC would have. These include land grabbing, disruption of local livelihoods, higher rates of drug abuse, labor migration, and other factors that could disrupt the peace of the local community, exacerbating challenges for Myanmar's leadership. The main examples of the protests against CMAC were the suspension of the Mitsone Dam, which I already mentioned, in 2011, and the protests against the Kyaukphyu deep sea port. It is imperative for both the EAOs and the Myanmar government to gain the support of the local communities to advance any projects in the area and lead to long-term success for the CMAC. So, next. So, I'll conclude by saying ensuring political stability, addressing humanitarian needs, and promoting inclusive development are essential for the long-term success of CMAC and regional stability. The continuing conflicts and increasing power of the ethnic armed organizations, EAOs, have China adopting a carrot and stick approach to the actors on both sides of the conflict. In a way, the current conflict has acted as a hindrance to the CMAC and has also influenced its progress. Thank you.
Thank you, Noah, for your presentation. Let's give all the customers around. Now we will move on to the discussion session. Let me invite Rama Devi from Department of IR, Maharajah School University, Mysore, for inputs to all the customers. We have 3 minutes.
My name is Rama Devi from International Relations Department. So my first question is goes to first presenter.
Yes,
Thank you
please.
for presenting, in-depth presenting. So my first question is goes to how has China's responses to the 2021 coup affected its influence in Myanmar? My second question is goes to Chetan. In what ways has China used diplomatic and economic and
Is it just me or their internet is not working?
For the presenters, we will take a couple of questions from the audience and we'll get back to you at the end.
Excuse me. I did not get the question.
Yeah,
What?
can you please repeat, because I think there was a pause and I couldn't hear either.
Yeah.
How has China responses to the 2021 coup affected its influence in Myanmar?
Okay, second question.
Second question. How have China's investment and infrastructure and projects been affected by the post-coup instability?
I hope you received the questions. Okay. From the
Were
audience.
both the coups, were both the questions addressed to me?
No, the second question is
Okay. Okay.
The second question is for me, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
From the audience, anybody have any questions? Aprupa, do you have a question? Please go ahead.
I do. Thank you, Anu. My questions are for Chetan first. Chetan, thank you for this fascinating talk and especially emphasizing on the history so brilliantly, given that it's not your larger focus when it comes to research. I was looking forward to, you rightly mentioned about the skepticism when it comes to Tatmadaws and also the China's equation during Nevin's period. But I don't know why didn't focus on the equation given the Burmese Communist Party and its influence during that period. That's what something I was just curious to know. The other question, or rather than question, I have an input for Femi. Femi, thank you for the wonderful presentation. Femi, as you're interested and knowing your research, I thought I will just add on that, when you look into the larger the crony capitalism and the scams and other things you were mentioning, it will be fascinating to know about the also the bride cell that goes between the border and between Myanmar and China, not prostitution but selling of bride, and that has massively increased after the coup, especially the worsening of the conflict situation. If you are interested, you can just look into that also. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Aprupa. Abhimanyu, do you have a question?
Yes, I'm Abhimanyu Solanki from University of Delhi. So my first question is to Dipanita. Like, can you just elaborate more on like whether you look at the Myanmar's foreign policy in terms of strategic autonomy or just in terms of dependence? Like, how does its closeness with the China impacts its regional standing within the ASEAN? And then second question is to Chetan Singh Rana. It's a wonderful presentation. So my question is like how you look at the China's policy in terms of stability theory, whether it's strategic hedging or just a policy dilemma. When we look at the China, which is pursuing a dual track policy, engaging both with the junta and the opposition forces. So how you look at it? Is it a strategic hedging or is it just a policy dilemma? My third question is to Femi Francis, and as you mentioned that on one side that China is supplying weaponry, but on other side its investments getting affected due to the military rule, and you called it China's multi-pronged approach. But how does Beijing justifies this apparent contradictory approach? Then lastly, the Nova's presentation. I believe that there's a need to look into more into statistics if we are talking about the China-Myanmar economic corridor. And especially if you look at the oil pipeline and the gas pipeline, in both the cases, if you look at the stats, that these projects are not that much profitable in terms of what China get in return on investment. And till time, even after so many years, these projects are not being utilized fully. So if we have some more data with respect to these projects, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Newman. Please go ahead. Can you come here?
Yeah, so this is open to everyone, and everyone's talked about like what stakes China has, what it's doing. But do you think it has effectively neo-colonized Myanmar, or has at least effectively planned to neo-colonize it? Because doesn't matter if it's not getting enough benefits out of it or not, but has it implanted that influence? It's open to everyone.
We will get back. Okay, one more from the audience. Sintuja, do you have a question?
Yeah, ma'am.
Please go ahead.
First of all, good afternoon to everyone. My question is to Ms. Maria. I want to ask you one thing. China Myanmar post-COP diplomatic was your topic. Do you see any realistic scenarios where the junta could rebalance its foreign policy towards the US or Western allies without facing severe political or economical repercussions?
Could you please repeat your question?
Do I need to repeat? Okay. Do you see any realistic scenarios where the junta could rebalance its foreign policy towards the US or Western allies without facing severe political or economic repercussions?
Thank you. Okay.
Thank you,
Do we have any more questions?
No, we will get back to the presenters now, and then we will go for another round of questions.
Okay. I think I'll go first because I had presented first and I have most questions. Thank you for the questions. These are very engaging ones, rather. The first question was on how China has responded to the 21 coup and affecting its influence. China's response has been evolving. The immediate response that we noticed, especially through newspapers or the government, especially press releases, also newspapers from China. If you see, they called it um, a change in government. They did not call it a coup. I don't remember the exact term, but they did not recognize it as a coup immediately.
Cabinet reshuffle.
Yeah, cabinet reshuffle, right? And since then, China has evolved its position stance, especially through press releases. However, if you see China's international, previously China had been safeguarding the junta or Myanmar from sanctions at the UN or protecting the Myanmar. But following the coup, especially in 22, if you see the trajectory, especially in the UN, in the dialogues, China has sometimes refrained from taking a position at the UN, especially. So this has been shifting, and whether it has affected China's influence in the country, it has. I think we have recently seen, just a couple of months back, there was an attack in the Mandalay consulate, and since then there has also been increased securitization of the consulate. And again, the months following it, we have seen growing interactions, engagements with the junta, with proposals to add more facilities to the oil and gas pipelines. Now, so we see an evolution. It has affected China's influence in the country, especially when it comes to the people, but cronies or the junta responds differently. I don't know whether I'm able to answer your questions, and I'll be able to take more questions. I mean, willing to take more questions if there are. The second was whether I'm looking at it as a strategic autonomy or dependence, or through the lens of dependence on China. While I'm looking at it from a perspective of Myanmar's strategic autonomy in my presentation, since I'm talking about both the SAC and the NUG's foreign policy, how they exercise agency, but any discussion on Myanmar's foreign policy perhaps cannot be, it will be on a lighter note, cannot be spoken about without talking about its dependence on China because of China's overwhelming and asymmetric presence. And the third, can the junta actually, or the Tamado or the SSC, engage with Western countries or replay the 2011 transition without being, scrutinized or penalized for its actions? If we look at, the current debate, especially in international law, especially on Myanmar, we see that the ICC, there are, current cases, especially of the 2016-2017 Rohingya patriation, the movement, the exodus. And so I think that has to come into place. It has to be, people have to be, brought to trial. And I do not think, that negotiation with Western countries is easy, because the 2017, the crisis, the Rohingya crisis, had affected its relations with Western countries. So that might have to be negotiated before Myanmar again tries to replay the 2000, the transition that had been played in 2011. So I hope I could answer your questions. Again, I'll be open to taking more questions if it's required. Thank you.
Thank you, Deepak. Forward to you, Chetan. You can respond to.
I just want to cross-check. The first question by Professor Ramadevi was regarding how the whole conflict has impacted CMEC and the other investments, right?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So, it's been nearly 4 years now since the coup happened and the civil war began, and the major impact has been the progress on a lot of these, especially the mega investment projects, has slowed down. A, because there's no consistent labor supply, and B, there's no security of this labor supply as well, which has prompted the Chinese government to actually put boots on ground. Um, the other thing that has impacted is the local support. The local support has extremely waned for these projects and their constructions. And we keep talking about the Mukson Dam, and the protest had a very environmental angle as well. But one of the primary reasons that those protests took so much energy was because it was also fueled by a certain level of xenophobia, right? And that's what we're seeing again playing out in Myanmar. It's not just about environment, it's also a certain level of anti-China attitude that's seeping into the people again, right? So those are the major concerns. And anti-China sentiment, I want to just share an anecdote. A lot of other countries which have projects going on in Myanmar, like India, Taiwan, Japan, their local workers and agencies that are working on their behalf have actually put out flags of their countries on their projects, said that these are not Chinese projects but Indian projects or Taiwanese projects or Japanese projects, so that the civilians and the local militias don't actually attack these projects, right? So that is how the impact on CMEC has been on ground. um, Apurupa's question on CPB and why did I not focus on CPB as much? Honestly, I wanted to, and in my paper, I have actually focused a little more on the Communist Party of Burma, and I've referred to Bert Littner's book on the rise and fall of the CPB party, and it's just because of the constraints of a presentation of 7 minutes that I could not go into the history of CPB. Otherwise, it is one of the most important fascination as to how during the 60s to 80s, how CPB was a major factor that determined the relations between China and Myanmar. And uh, how, in current context, how that has played out is the vast state leadership is largely comprised of the earlier CPB comrades, right? And how that has allowed China to uh, influence a lot of uh, activities and the tactical operations of the vast state army in present times, right? Because there is a leadership continuity from the CPB to the vast state army. Abhimanyu's question on hedging and whether it's strategic hedging or policy dilemma. Uh, First thing is that this hedging concept is largely an international politics concept which is being applied in a domestic setting, right? So there's a level of when you transport a concept from one setting to another, there are conceptual give and takes that you have to do, right? In my opinion, in my assessment, if you want to divide it between strategic hedging or policy dilemma, I would say it's strategic hedging, because China's engagement with these different actors and the way it engages with these different actors is not a very recent phenomena. These policies have been on ground and have been developed over decades, right? So I would say this would qualify more under strategic hedging than policy dilemma, because China recognizes that you cannot have a monolithic Myanmar with a very linear political system that will operate smoothly. Right? That recognition exists in Beijing, and that almost dictates how they approach different regions and different actors in Myanmar. I would also like to take the interesting question of neo-colonization. That's a very interesting question, and maybe someday we can look at China's great game at neo-colonization in Myanmar. As of today, I think it would be too early to say that the Chinese project is of a neo-colonization uh, project, because when you say neo-colonization, it takes away the agency from local actors to the colonizer, right? And I believe that the actors in Myanmar still have agency to a great extent, whether it is the different EAOs or the junta or even the NLD, right? So they still have their agency. So I would say it's still early to call it a project of neo-colonization. Yeah, that's all on my end for now.
Thank you, Chair. Femi, forward to you.
I'll address two questions. One suggestion by Aprupa that I should look at the bright sides. I think so that would be an interesting inclusion to my topic, how essentially a civil conflict in another country can become a domestic concern when it's your neighbor. So I think so that would be a really good example for me to largely look into. And yeah, I'll definitely include it. Maybe in a larger framework, how I've put in. It should be interesting. Abhimanyu,
No,
you are.
no, sorry, Febi, may I add? From you can also look at from the ethnic correlation perspective, because although except for VA specifically, they don't have larger ethnic similarities with others, but there are sub-ethnic similarities. So
Do
those play a big role.
you think it's
Sorry?
also by the fact that there is a fall in marriages in China itself?
Yeah,
And
yeah, definitely there is.
yeah,
And but it also, because it's easily available, the price and the dowry does play a big role also. And also because they want from the similar sub ethnicity and other things, it's easy. And apparently they are docile, hence
if I may,
that
dowry by like which side? Like who are they asking?
the guy side. From the guy's side. So in Chinese, a lot of these China, I'm talking about also in the border area, China, right? So there, the guy needs to pay a certain amount for the bride. So the amount is much lesser in case of when it comes to the Myanmarese side, if one wants to buy it. So they're buying it. They're buying brides.
Buying them.
I'm putting it nicely as a dowry, but it's buying of brides basically. So there are other factors, they with if you read the paper, there are several papers on it, like they're considered docile, they can take care of household much better, lack of education, they don't complain because they know they have to go back to the conflict region. These factors apparently play a lot of role.
That's a very interesting point that I'll definitely add it. My second question was from Abhimanyu. He asked me, um, uh, isn't the, I'm just paraphrasing it, isn't the multi-pronged approach contradictory? Basically, that's what you're saying, that on one hand you provide weapons, but then you're concerned about your investments that you have there. What you need to understand is, by when I say it's a multi-pronged approach, it's not about what they're supplying, but who they're supplying to. So by multi-pronged, it means that they are supplying to multiple actors, because it didn't really work out with the first one. They did start with junta. They did focus on supporting junta. It didn't work out. Then they shifted to EOS. It didn't work out. Then they shifted to EOS in specific regions where they have strongholds. So it's purely opposite. That's what my perspective was, that they are no loyalists. They shift according to what works best for their investment. And I do think it's a pretty smart strategy rather than being a loyalist, because at the end of the day, they want to look at their investments. I think so. Your investment, your new colonial question was asked. I again do believe when we are bringing larger westernized theory in line of what you said, we need to consider that this is an internal conflict, and it was very nice how you put it that it's as if they have lost agency. There is something from outside who's dictating this conflict, but which is not the case as of now when it comes to Myanmar.
Thank you, Femi.
I would like to respond to Abhimanyu. I've not seen the data myself, but I will look into it. But in my opinion, I feel like China is not looking for a economic advantage, or it's not looking for economic returns. Rather, China is looking to have more strategic advantage in the region. Like I said, we would like to have another alternative trade route rather than the Malacca Strait. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you, Noah, for your
I
response.
can add to one of the questions that Abhimanyu asked to, I think, Femi, regarding, the contradiction between the two strategies of, supporting, protecting investment versus providing weapons. I don't think they're necessarily contradictory, because providing arms is also a tool of, establishing dependence. So once you establish dependence with these different actors, to a certain extent, not always, but to a certain extent, you can also control the end use of these weapons. Right? So if China is supplying weapons to particular armed militias, they can, to a certain extent, control where these weapons and how these weapons are used. Right? So that's not necessarily contradictory.
Yeah, I agree.
We will take next round of questions. Please. Go ahead.
Thank you, Maria. I have four sets of questions to all four panelists. The first one is on the idea of Myanmar trying to balance its foreign policy, especially after 2021. Dipanita, I like the idea of looking at Myanmar trying to balance. Let me ask you, when you try to balance, you take balancing, not hedging. So it's a good IR question, why countries try to balance. My question to you is, it starts with the premise that Myanmar has tools to balance. Yeah, if you're balancing, then you need some tools to balance, So my first question to you is, what tools has Myanmar in post 2021, and how heavy these tools are? They should be able to. It's not only the question of having tools; they should be heavy enough to balance two big weights like US and China. No, so that's my first question to you. What does Myanmar has? In fact, that's a question that I would want to ask Femi and Chetan also at a later stage. What does Myanmar has in its kitty in dealing with countries like China? Right? Coming back to Dipanita, this question of balancing, is it only, why did you choose only US and China? Myanmar is also balancing ASEAN with China and balancing China with ASEAN on its side. It's playing out. Maybe this is a question that I would want to ask Chetan and Femi also to answer. The tools and the actors that it has. I would even say Myanmar is also balancing India, balancing with India and balancing India with China. So that's a question that, when you balance, you don't balance with one person against the other. You balance with many others. No, that's what the typical balance of power that we have studied as a part of IR. So my question to you here is, how is Myanmar balancing? And is it, why would you pick up only US and China? What about the other countries it's balancing? Yeah. So that's my first question to you on that. The second set of question is to Chetan and Femi, but it overlaps on the others as well. Both your presentation looked China heavy in terms of what China wants, what influences China has. What about Myanmar? Is Myanmar, the way I listened to you both, it looked like as if China is this one super giant and Myanmar is one pygmy. Yeah, is that the case? Does Myanmar has its own cards to play? Yeah, the instability question, Chetan, you addressed. Yeah, the way I listen to you is as if it's only Myanmar is getting unstable. Does Chinese action kind of results in shooting in your foot? Are there repercussions, economic, ethnic repercussions for China as well? Yeah. So this instability, in fact, Chetan, if I could be a bit critical on your presentation, the first two part was very clear. Don't tell me you lack time. The instability part, how these two leads to instability, and instability for whom? No, I would, here when we are talking about instability, Myanmar military as an actor, ethnic groups and ethnic armed organizations as an actor, and China. So instability for whom? This is something that I want you to respond to. And this question to both Femi and Chetan. It looked like as if it is only China and Myanmar from your presentation. You did refer to the ethnic groups and ethnic armed organizations. The way I heard, as if it's synonymous, it is not. Maybe I want you to explain to me, where do the ethnic groups and EAOs stand in China, Myanmar? When you say Myanmar, it's a military, it's a government, whether it's military or it's whoever is running the state. Where do these ethnic groups and ethnic armed associations, ethnic armed organizations, EAOs stay? Yeah. The last question on CMAC is another interesting question. I think Solanki asked, Abhimanyu Solanki asked that question in terms, if I have to be critical on that presentation, you don't make a story on economic corridor without data. I think this should be one of the few presentations I heard about a corridor without data. No? Where is the data here in terms of what passes through? But my question to you and kind of a counter to Solanki is, the corridor is not an economic corridor. It is a strategic corridor. So economic losses is not a big factor. So we don't have to assess the success of a corridor by whether it makes money or whether it makes economic sense. Yeah, if my idea is strategic, I don't mind losing a few. So my question to you here is it a tactical economic, I sell something, you buy something kind of a corridor? Or is it a long-term, in fact, if we have to refer, maybe Femi, you should be able to tell this when compared to CPEC, China-Pakistan Economic Corridor and China-Myanmar Economic Corridor. These two corridors have an economic factor, but it is an afterthought. It is more of strategic, The point that you made, if I want to unchoke Malacca, what is I am willing to spend on it? So whatever the corridor comes out, it's Malacca is my strategic goal. Corridor is just an aside. If some goods go through, it's okay for me. No, but then the larger question that I want all four of you to look into is how much is the China Myanmar economic corridor a tool for Myanmar and the ethnic groups? Do they also bargain in that? In Pakistan, the local groups bargain. They in fact, if you build a corridor here, then ethnic group says, let us have a eastern corridor, a western corridor. Yeah. So is the corridor only for the Chinese to benefit, or the other ethnic groups also balance or hedge the corridor to their and make use of that corridor to advance their own strategies? Yeah. So that question can even Dipandita can answer it. The corridor is not just a corridor one side. It's not a one sided. If you think it's only China is making use of it, I think we have to relook at it. Ethnic groups are making better use of the corridor. Yeah. I'll stop here. I'm sorry, I took more time.
Thank you, sir. So, considering the growing impact of the military of China and their strategy of string of pearls,
So this method of strategy has been concerning for both India as well, considering both SPEC and SMEC. So is it actually concerning for India? That's the main question. Any more questions?
Yes.
Okay.
I have one question. It's kind of overlapping between you and Chefana and Fanny. And you talk about China trying to protect its investment in the region, and it has been playing like a big actor in this whole conflict, and also shielding in security action from being taken in the UN. So and again, you talk about the strategic economic corridor. Is this strategic economic corridor to undermine other powers like India and have access to the Indian Ocean region, or is it just purely trade without any motive behind it?
Any more questions? Okay, we'll get back to the panel now, starting with Deepa. Yeah. Deepa.
Okay. Thank you, sir, for the thought-provoking question, the first one, but I'll address the second first, which is why the choice of topic. I have mentioned somewhere during my very brief presentation is that it's an extension to my PhD research, which is on exploring China-US relations, contestations globally. And I look at how it affects nascent democratization. And my case study for the thesis is Myanmar. And it's a decadal study of the period of transition. And I look at how two great powers jockey for influence in Myanmar. So this particular paper here, presentation here, is an extension to my doctoral research, which ends around the 2020 period, and then this is where I follow up on with this presentation. Answering what are the tools that Myanmar has and how it uses them, I think you have also in your second set of questions addressed indirectly the question itself, which is at present the SSC is officially recognized to be the the representative of the government, despite its presence in the UN being different. But there are embassies, there are other diplomatic forums where the SSC's representatives are representing Myanmar. That is one of the tools, having diplomatic platform, being recognized as a sovereign state. Myanmar as a whole is still recognized as a sovereign state. I think that came up as a discussion previously, whether it's a colony or whether the state has agency. So yes, one is agency, sovereignty. These are two of the more important ones. However, there is also territorial and resource aspects of control of aspects of whoever is in control of the territory, like so these are used as tools in bargaining with especially neighboring countries like China, territory and resource, natural resource. There is also several treaties, like you mentioned why I have not included ASEAN, again because of the paucity of time and space. But there are common treaties with ASEAN. There are other regional forums where Myanmar can exercise because of its diplomatic recognition there. So these are some of the tools that I can identify and think of now, and this is how wherever whoever is represented at the regional or international level, that is how they try to leverage, because they still have access to the dialogue or the negotiation. That's at the diplomatic level. Because for my presentation I'm looking more at the study of the agency of state. I think I'll stick to that. Again, I'll be taking in suggestions. So yeah.
Thank you, Deepa, for working with you.
Thank you, sir, for great questions. First, like I'll go in a different order. First, regarding instability for whom, the paper and the presentation was written from a perspective of the Chinese policy in Myanmar. So primary focus was instability for China in Myanmar, and then there's always an associated concern of the conflict spillover, especially in Yunnan. So potential instability in the in the bordering region, right? So that was the perspective frame that I used for this particular paper. Now, your other questions are regarding what Myanmar has in its kitty versus the tools that Myanmar has to offer, in managing these different relations. And my counter question would be, what do we mean by Myanmar today, right? This is probably the weakest power at the center that we've had in the history of Myanmar. This particular junta controls basically 1/3 to 2/3 of territory, depending on the sources we look at, right? So this is one of the weakest central regimes that we've had. So when we talk about what Myanmar has to offer, are we talking about junta? Are we talking about the different ethnic armed organizations? Because that will change depending on which region they're from. And are we talking about the NUG, right? But taking the question in its spirit, if you're talking about the junta, I think one is the access to the different project sites and their safety. That's possibly one thing, because these projects, even though practically suspended, are still there, right? So how forward can they go? The other thing, especially what we see in case of Russia, is that Russia is a state which has been heavily sanctioned. It has very limited avenues of trade, but Myanmar has emerged its top destination for arms trade, right? So that is one thing that we can look at as to what Myanmar has to offer when, when it comes to tools within its kitty. Um, and there were questions regarding string of pearls or security concerns for India, and whether the corridor and these strategic investments are just strategic or are just economical or have strategic angles. Obviously, they have strategic angles. China for India was always a northern neighbor, and now if these ports are established, uh, I'm not very hawkish as a general scholar who believes, string of pearls is a major security threat. All great powers, when they're rising, they do these projects, right? The US has 7 fleets across the world, right? And China, as it's expanding, will also expand its footprint, right? So from a northern neighbor, it could also become our southern or eastern neighbor, right? If these ports are established and become functional one day, right? So obviously they're a point of concern, but again, not the focus of my study today.
Chetan, do you think China will get success in influencing or overtaking in Myanmar internal, issues?
Ma'am, my question to that would be, what do we mean by success today? Because I think Myanmar already has great influence when it comes to different actors. But okay, for example, over the last 1 to 2 years, we've seen that a lot of ceasefires were established and put in place. But these ceasefires did not really last for a long time, right? So maybe the fact that China was able to bring these different actors on a table to actually agree to a ceasefire be called a success. But the fact that these ceasefires did not last for long could be called a failure. So I guess our definitions of success and failure will define whether China will be successful or a failure in actually exerting influence in Myanmar.
Thank you, Chetan. Femi, do you?
Yeah, I'll just add on to that, not a lot. So you asked the larger question that you asked, that what does Myanmar has in its kitty to balance China, but to balance China against who? I mean, even though there is India and ASEAN and other countries, but the biggest actor here is China, and China does know that, and even Myanmar knows that. So rather than balancing, it would be leveraging its position, and the leverage is the stakes that I mentioned that China has in this region. That would be my actor, and that would also be their tools to leverage, that you have so and so investment. If you want to continue that, you invest in me, and you invest you invest in whatever ideology that I support. So that is their tool. So the stakes are the tool as well. The last question, your question, you said that is it China's theory, string of pearl theory? Okay, so this is something that this is something that has been asked of me a lot of times. String of pearls theory is not an official theory by China. It's something that US quoted, that China has a theory that this is how it wants to expand. The problem with studying China is that we always have a hawkish vision of China, and we tend to look at it in that manner. Sometimes it's just about investment, and it's a country that it wants to expand. Goes to you again. Again, you said that is China investing in Myanmar to downgrade India's influence? I mean, India, again, we like to pose as ourselves as an important actor, but we are nowhere near the influence that China has in this region. So I think so we are we're thinking too highly of ourselves. I think though even if we are there or not, it wouldn't matter. It still will invest. So it's more of their own interest rather than India or South Asia. But it definitely sees itself as a regional and a global actor. And that was in my perspective, that this is a stepping stone towards, you can see how China is behaving, how China has been vocal about the Israel-Palestine conflict, how it has been vocal on Russia-Ukraine conflict, how it has been actively, China was the reason why the Palestinian factions united, right? So I see this as well as an example of China moving towards a larger, wanting to be a larger global actor in the international sphere.
Thank you. So, to answer your question, if it is a tactical corridor, I believe so. With the points, Abhimanyu was saying that they're not seeing a return, like investment return. So, if that is the data, on that basis of the data, I would say, yes, China is not looking for an economic advantage. It's looking for more strategical and a tactical advantage. And then if there is a long-term investment, once again, I believe, yes, it is a long-term investment from the side of China. Because I think we can see from the commitment of China, like even when there was initial slow progress or no progress of CMEC, China has used the opportunity of this current conflict to push forward their interests and continue the progress of the CMEC. And then how much is CMEC a tool for Myanmar and the ethnic groups? I've said about the ethnic groups, like I've said about the ethnic armed organizations. I've not covered up the ethnic groups, but in response to the if Myanmar sees it as a tool, I believe the junta government do use it as a tool. For instance, China's veto power is important for when it comes to international sanctions and international condemnation. The junta government looks to China's support in this, and in return, the junta is hoping to gain some favors in means of arms and ammunition and supporting the further military in the conflict. For the ethnic groups, so I'll look into it.
Thank you, Nawal. Let me thank all the presenters and also the discussants for their presence and their valuable inputs. Let's give them a round of applause. With that, we have come to the end of the session. Once again, thank you all the presenters and those who participated in this session online. Let's break for tea. We will come back at
3:45.
3:45. Okay. We will come back and join back at 3:45 for the last session of this event. Thank you once again.
Thank you.
of the conclave. We have four presentations in this session. By Swati, she is joining online. She will come a bit later. She says she joins at 3:50. And then we'll start with Pragya, Anamaria, and Devika, and then we'll go to Swati at the end. Yeah. And then we have two discussants, Sindhuja and Esther. I hope Sindhuja has joined online. Not yet. Okay.
So I think so because the original timing was
I
at
know,
4.
I know. I also sent them a note to join at 3:45. So we will start. Just give them a minute.
Tell it first thing. So she's like that we should start at 3:45 because you said 3:45.
But your mom is there.
Oh.
The bundles of the world come together, make the life of the rest miserable.
You are the service.
That's not actually. You are making
So
my life.
Malayali now, how convenient.
So you should remember your team, sir.
I know. Wow, sir. My full of Malayalis. We should be careful.
I know, it should not be global politics. It should be
Politics.
You're not right.
Do we have
Few
your number?
more minutes.
Number? Are you sure the signature might have it?
The difference between Sachin Tendulkar and Rahul Dravid. Both are good batsmen, but Rahul Dravid used to, when he is in form, he never gives up his wicket. He keeps playing because he knows there will be a season in which it will be dry. So perhaps this is your season. So make it count and play as much as you can. Yeah. For all these gyan, you have to pay me.
I was thinking about it recently.
We'll start. Keep it debate. Here we go. Shall we? Okay. Okay. Welcome back. Let's start this session. We have 4 presentations. I'm hoping Sindhuja will join us shortly. And this time we will request the youngest in my team, Floor Elizabeth Philip. Got it correct?
Yes, sir.
She will coordinate the session. Yeah. Over to you.
Okay, so first, since Swati is not here yet, we'll start with Pragya. She is from the Department of International Relations, University of Mysore. She will be presenting on ASEAN and Myanmar, limits of regional approaches. You have 6 minutes. Presentation is Thank you.
Okay, so good evening, everyone. So I'll start with the detailed background. So the relationship between Myanmar and ASEAN, it goes back to 1997, when Myanmar was admitted to ASEAN along with Laos and Cambodia. It showed that Myanmar was ready to integrate itself into the regional community after years of isolation due to junta rule and human rights violation. However, the initial challenge with the admission in ASEAN was the authoritarian regime in Myanmar and poor human rights record. Many members of the regional cooperation questioned Myanmar's membership due to its internal issues, and it would have undermined the value of ASEAN in front of the world. So Myanmar kept trying to repair its image with the help of the ASEAN Regional Forum, or the ARF, and other platforms. Despite all these efforts, the ongoing conflicts such as the Rohingya crisis, the ethnic conflicts, or the failure of democratization failed the efforts on both national and regional level. It faced a lot of criticisms, especially due to the human rights abuse and the Rohingya Muslim minority issues. So today, I will be discussing about ASEAN's approach to Myanmar and the challenges associated with it. The ongoing political crisis in Myanmar has tested ASEAN's ability to manage regional stability while maintaining its principle of non-interference. So we will explore ASEAN's efforts, Myanmar's responses, the issues, and the possible future trajectory of this relationship.
Next slide. Next.
Yeah. So ASEAN's approach to Myanmar, there are some key points. So ASEAN has taken steps to address the Myanmar crisis, mainly through its 5-point consensus, which aims to promote peace, dialogue, and humanitarian aid. And however, its implementation has been weak due to the military junta's resistance. ASEAN has held multiple meetings with Myanmar since the 2021 coup, but its approach has remained largely diplomatic, avoiding strong punitive measures. This highlights ASEAN's principle of non-interference, which seeks to balance respect for national sovereignty with the need for regional stability. However, despite these efforts, ASEAN's influence on Myanmar's military government remains limited. So, moving on to the next slide, military government's response. So, Myanmar's junta has largely dismissed ASEAN's initiative, as it has refused to fully engage with ASEAN special envoys, and instead it has sought external support, particularly from China, to maintain legitimacy and economic backing. Excuse me. The junta continues to defy ASEAN's calls for peace and has shown no intent to transition toward a more inclusive political process. So this defiance further weakens ASEAN's credibility in handling the crisis. So now moving on to the key issues between ASEAN and Myanmar. So there are several challenges, but I picked up the main challenges. First one being the Rohingya crisis. The ongoing human rights abuse and the mass displacement have created a humanitarian disaster, with ASEAN failing to take a firm stance against Myanmar's actions. And the second one is the border instability, which is the political turmoil has caused spillover effects, affecting neighboring ASEAN states such as Thailand. So refugee movements and security threats have become major concerns. And the third one is China's influence. So China's deep engagement with Myanmar's military government weakens ASEAN's ability to mediate effectively, as Beijing provides economic and political support to the junta. So these factors make it difficult for ASEAN to enforce meaningful change. Sorry. Can you Yeah, so ASEAN's challenges and weaknesses. Before this, ASEAN faces several structural issues that limit its ability to act decisively. So the first one is limited enforcement capacity, which means that ASEAN lacks mechanism to enforce its decision on member states. The second one is internal divisions, that member states hold differing views on Myanmar that prevents them from showing a united front. The third one is credibility concerns. So ASEAN's inability to address the crisis undermines its global reputation as a regional peace mediator. So without institutional reforms, ASEAN may struggle to handle Myanmar's prolonged instability. Now moving on to the future of ASEAN-Myanmar relations. So given these challenges, the question is that where is the relationship going? So a stalemate is likely unless ASEAN takes a more proactive role in the area. And some potential pathways that I've included are, first one is strengthening mediation efforts by ensuring Myanmar's compliance with diplomatic resolution. Second one is partnering with global actors such as the UN to provide humanitarian assistance and increase diplomatic pressure. And the third one is pushing for greater accountability from the military junta through stronger diplomatic measures and collective regional pressure. So ASEAN must demonstrate stronger leadership and unity to prevent Myanmar's crisis from further destabilizing the region. So to conclude, ASEAN's handling of Myanmar crisis highlights several challenges. Yeah. To move forward, ASEAN must address few of these concerns. The first one is the overcoming of structural weaknesses. So ASEAN needs a stronger enforcement mechanism to ensure compliance with regional agreements. The second one is enhancing regional unity. A more coordinated approach among ASEAN members is necessary to present a united front. The third one being the strategic partnership. So collaborating with global actors like the UN and key international stakeholders can strengthen diplomatic and humanitarian efforts and holding the junta accountable. So ASEAN must find ways to pressure Myanmar's military government while balancing diplomatic engagement as well. And the last one is safeguarding ASEAN's credibility. So a more decisive stance on Myanmar will reaffirm ASEAN's role as a key regional organization in maintaining peace and stability. So without these changes, ASEAN risks losing its influence and Myanmar crisis may continue to destabilize the region as well. So that was it. Thank you. And I look forward to the questions.
Thank you, Pragya. Moving on, we have Anu Maria Joseph from National Institute of Advanced Studies, Bangalore. She will be presenting on the topic coups, military regimes, ethnic conflicts, and civil war, drawing parallels with Sudan.
Thank you, Flora. I will be presenting on coups, military regimes, ethnic conflicts, and a civil war in drawing parallels with Sudan and Myanmar. If you look at two countries and two continents, but they converge in many similar points. That's something that we could see from both countries. Can you go to the next slide? I have made a table looking at military coups and regimes, ethnic conflict, failed transition, and civil war in both countries. Both Myanmar and Sudan have historically gone through coups since independence. They are and have been under strong military regimes and went through failed democratic transition. In Myanmar, between 2011 to 2021, we saw an incomplete democratic transition, which ended with the coup in 2021. In Sudan, in 2019, there was a revolution which gave a hope for a civilian transition, which failed in 2021 with another military coup. Both countries are geographically divided according to ethnic groups and ethnic and ethnic armed wings. And since independence, there have been fights between these groups for geographical control over their region, resources, recognition, marginalization, and sometimes domination. Finally, an active civil conflict is ongoing in Sudan between Rapid Support Forces and the Sudanese Armed Forces, which aligns with Arab and non-Arab ethnic militias, and at the same time, Myanmar between the junta and several ethnic armed groups seeking autonomy in the country. That's about the overview of similar developments in Sudan and Myanmar. Today, I will be looking at these similar developments in these two countries, trying to see whether they share similar issues or characteristics related to these developments. Can you move to the next slide? These are the main 4 converging issues that I have identified from these two countries. First is the role of a flawed civil-military relations. In both countries, historically, the military had an overarching power over any civilian institutions. In Myanmar, the military has remained the most powerful institution since independence in 1948. During the democratic transition period between 2011 and 2020, the civilian institutions never experienced independence from the military's hold. The military's constitutional powers were a challenge to Aung San Suu Kyi, and Suu Kyi needed the military support to make any constitutional amendments. These constitutional guarantees provided the military with a permanent role in the civilian institutions. The military's firm grip on power undermined civilian institutions. For example, the judiciary, which was not independent and was frequently used by military to legitimize its actions and suppress the dissent. And also the police could not protect the citizens or uphold rule of law. Instead of it, they used to perpetrate violence against ethnic minorities and protesters. The same happened if you look at Sudan, for 30 years, it was under the dictatorship of Omar al-Bashir, and he strengthened the military in such a way that it usurped the democratic victories of 2019 revolution, which was followed by the 2021 coup. So that's about the flawed civil-military relations. When it comes to the lack of inclusive governance, Myanmar's military historically prioritized the Burman ethnic nationalism at the expense of other ethnic minorities. Ethnic minorities such as the Shan, Karen, Kachin, and Rohingya have been excluded. The military responded brutally to ethnic groups, these ethnic groups seeking autonomy. The case of the Rohingya crisis in 2017 is the best example. And in Sudan, the Arab-dominated political elites marginalized non-Arab African groups in the periphery, such as those in Darfur, South Kordofan, almost all the Darfur states, and the Blue Nile. In Darfur, we saw the 2004 Darfur crisis, and followed by that now also during the ongoing civil war. The Darfur is mostly targeted by the RSF and its Arab militias against the Masalit non-Arab communities who are residing in the Darfur region. Third issue is failed state institutions. Sudan's state institutions have long been characterized by a lack of legitimacy, weak infrastructure, and widespread corruption. This institutional failure can be traced back to decades of autocratic rule under Omar al-Bashir. The government's inability to represent diverse ethnic exacerbated tensions, particularly in the peripheries like Darfur. However, even after ousting Bashir in 2019, this institutional failure persisted. Sudan's transitional government, which was meant to balance power between civilian leaders and military leadership, was sabotaged by continuing military influence and lack of a unified approach to governance. Similarly, the coup in Myanmar dismantled the civilian-led government and effectively paralyzed the institutions of state governance. Despite effort by the NLD, the military's swift takeover destroyed the limited institutional structures that had been built during the decade-long period of semi-democracy. The failure to establish independent functional institutions outside the military has prevented Myanmar from developing a cohesive or an inclusive state institution. That's about the failed state institutions. The fourth issue is the role of external actors. Both in Myanmar and Sudan, the UN's capacity to intervene is being challenged in the UN Security Council, with any efforts being vetoed by Russia and China. when we look at regional organizations, ASEAN has prioritized regional stability over any action against the military junta. It has not been able to bring any significant changes due to its principle of non-interference in the internal affairs of its member states. When we look at Sudan, the African Union or any other countries, any other neighboring countries in Africa, when they try to make any efforts to bring peace or mediate peace between these conflict actors, they are accused of being biased to either of the two groups, either RSF or ASEAN. So any regional efforts by African Union or any neighboring states have failed so far. Then, if you look at other external actors, especially in Sudan, also in Myanmar, there is an abundance of weapon supply in both countries towards the conflict actors. If you look at Myanmar, there is Russia and China supporting the conflict actors with weapons. And if you look at Sudan, the RSF and SAF is being supported by UAE and Iran with weapon supply. So this abundance of weapon supply give them an incentive to continue the violence which is ongoing in the country. So this is how the external actors also play a role in this conflict. These are the main issues that I have identified. That's common for both Myanmar and also Sudan. However, although these are converging issues, the way in which these issues act are different in Myanmar and also in both. So it's not similar in both countries. Can you move to the next slide? Coming to the conclusion and also trajectories, Sudan and Myanmar share similarities in terms of coups, military regimes, ethnic conflicts, and civil war, and also sometimes civilian uprisings. So this has been attributed to several root and parallel causes, including historically flawed, as I said, civil-military relations, lack of inclusive governance, failed state institutions, and role of several external actors. The implications have been decades of political instability, ethnic conflicts, and a large humanitarian crisis that we see in both countries. And what will be the trajectory? Until unless these root causes, root issues are addressed, I believe the political instability and the conflicts will continue. That's it from my side.
Thank you, Anu. Now we have a presentation from Devika. She's from St. Joseph's University, Bangalore. She will be presenting on the topic international sanctions, implication and their efficacy. You have 6 + 2 minutes.
Very good evening, everyone. My topic is international sanctions, that is implication and their efficacy. So considering international sanction, which is one of the most powerful tools that is wielded by states and global institutions, if you consider the economic embargoes to the trade restrictions and asset freezes that happens. So the sanctions serve as both as a deterrent and a punitive measure, but they are intended to pressurize the nations, organizations, and individuals. But next slide, sir. But the main question is that comes to the next slide, which is the statement of the problem. Like, do the sanctions truly achieve the intended objective, or do they disappropriately impact the civilian population? Because sanctions that has been made by the countries of US, UK, Canada, Australia are most by the West is considering very much, creating an impact to the civilian population, and is there any way to circumvent them? So do they serve as an effective means of conflict resolution, or do they deepen the geopolitical rift? That is, the sanctions impose pressure on the junta to restore the democracy and respect the human rights. And next comes to the economic sanction, arms and embargo. So that is the question. That's my research question. Sanction, is it the solution or an escalation? Next slide, sir. Which comes to the next part, which is the issues involved. So when it comes to sanctions, there has been an economic decline because of the sanctions. They are targeting key sectors like the finance, the exports, the foreign investment, etc. So in Myanmar's case, the sanctions led to the decrease in trade with the West, obviously because the sanctions have been done by these countries, which the country is not able to access the crucial markets in the capital. Not just that, it has also got impacts on informal economic system as well, because sanctions that has been implemented by the West is creating a way of more illegal economical trade between, Myanmar and other countries, especially the China and the Russia. And that comes to the next point that is impacting on the social infrastructure. There is a suspension of development aid, weakening of the public health and education system, and also increase in poverty because of these sanctions, where the economic instability and weakened social services has created economic challenges faced by the ordinary people. Next point, which is political and military resistance. The military allied remained largely ineffective because, as I mentioned before, the illegal trade is happening and deeper economic military ties with other countries of India, China, and Russia. So the shift in alliances allowed Myanmar to bypass all those sanctions. Next slide, sir. This is the analysis of sanctions. So in my paper, I'm going to include almost every sanctions that by the countries. But I would like to first focus on the UN sanction, not a sanction, but a non-binding nature of this particular resolution. Which is the UN on 18 June 2021, the General Assembly adopted Resolution 75/287, which calls upon the member state to prevent the flow of arms into Myanmar. But despite all these efforts for a resolution, only 119 votes were in favor and 1 were against, which was the country of Belarus. And there was 36 abstentions. And apart from that, this resolution was basically non-binding. So these implications was voluntary, but the member states determines the compliances based on the domestic legal framework. Not just that, this particular calling upon the nation there was a lack of universal enforcement mechanism. And also there was loopholes and continued arm transfer for that. And there was Myanmar's military invasion tactics as well. So why is the sanctions not effective? Because first is the shifting bank channel. So what Myanmar does is that before 2022, the junta's foreign transaction was handled by Myanmar's foreign trade bank. So which was later sanctioned by the US and the European Union. But after the sanction, the junta moved its financial operation to Myanmar's economic bank, that is MEB, which is not yet sanctioned by the US. So they had an alternative option to the banking system where they shifted from banking channels to invade these kinds of sanctions. Not just that, they were using banks in third countries, especially when it comes to Thailand. They increased their financial dealings with Thai Bank, primarily Siam Commercial Bank. And from the UN reports of 2022-23, junta transaction through Thai banks were more than double from 60 million to nearly 130 million. And most of these transactions were processed by Siam Commercial Bank. So previously. Yeah, this is the analysis I said before. So from these analyses, there is a failed political reform. There is a counterproductive consequences and humanitarian crisis, as I mentioned before. And not just that, there was also a decline of use of international banking for military purposes and also blocking humanitarian aid and controlling resources. That is the third point. So from UN estimates, 18.6 million people in Myanmar require humanitarian assistance, over 2.7 million displaced since the coup. So from the findings, they are using 4-cut tactics, that is cutting off food, funds, intelligence, and recruits in opposition areas to terrorize the civilians and also to maintain the control. So here, there is a UN recommendation which said before, and which said the sanctions of Myanmar Economic Bank should also be included in the particular sanction. They should also target the aviation supply chain, because without involving all the transaction networks of Myanmar with other countries, we can't completely sanction Myanmar like that. So from a realistic assessment that I've made from my from the research that I've taken, so there is a requirement of expanding the sanction, and there is a requirement to pressurize the Thailand to stop the MOG payments. And next slide, sir. Yeah. So then moves to the future trajectory of it. So there was continued sanction, but there was limited impact. The futuristic aspect of this is that there will be sanctions which will continue, but the impact will be limited if this sanctions to the other banks or other transactions, which I mentioned before, is not there. So Western commitment to the sanction, the US, the EU, and the UK, Canada, Australia, expected to impose further sanction targeting the military-linked businesses and resources like aviation and fuel. So there is a symbiotic announcement that the sanction will coincide with other coup and international human rights events as well. And there was a minimal impacts on the junta strategies. Because despite nearly 20 rounds of US sanctions and multiple EU, UK measures, Myanmar's military remained unmoved. That comes to the next point, that is Myanmar's resistance, support from strategic partners. They have, as mentioned by the previous sessions by Femi and all. So there is China's economic and diplomatic backing and Russia's military assistance. And there is the ASEAN, not ASEAN, the ASEAN country support also, which ties the regional stability both in Myanmar and of course I mentioned before about Thailand also. And there has been alternative pressure tactic beyond the sanction. There is a private sector disengagement where there are energy giants like Chevron, Total, Woodside, which have excited the Myanmar, and the business disinvestment have made stronger economic impact than the stronger formal sanctions. So there has been diplomatic isolation and there has been support for opposition forces. And but still, when it comes to Myanmar's pro-democracy groups, the sanctions currently going on may not be working more effectively because there has been private sector, as I mentioned before. There has been now there has been a role of NGOs. So if the NGOs and boycott of other disinvestment campaigns happens, this can be a future for Myanmar's solving the solutions and economic pressure. Yeah, that's it.
Thank you, Devika. That was a nice presentation. Now we would like to move on to Swati Sood from Vivekananda College, University of Delhi. She will be presenting on India's investments in Myanmar, fostering regional connectivity, strategic interests, and economic cooperation. Swati, you have 6+2 minutes. You can begin.
Thank you, ma'am. Should I share the presentation myself?
Yes.
Sure, I'll just do so. Is my screen visible?
Yes.
All right. Greetings to everyone present here. So my paper is on India's investments in Myanmar, fostering regional connectivity, strategic interests, and economic cooperation. So my research question is, how have India's investments in Myanmar been impacted by the country's civil war? And what are the implications for regional connectivity, strategic interests, and economic cooperation? So looking at this from a retrospective viewpoint, India is the 11th largest foreign investor in Myanmar, with investments totaling approximately $773 million. Key investments are in the connectivity, energy, and infrastructure sector, and this is aligned with India's Act East policy along with the frameworks outlined in BIMSTEC and other multilateral forums. There are three major projects. The first one is the Kaladan Multimodal Transit Transport Project. It is meant to enhance trade via Myanmar's waterways and roads. The second one is the Shui Gas Project. It conducts offshore gas exploration, and it's crucial for maintaining India's presence in Myanmar's energy trade. And the third one is the India-Myanmar-Thailand Trilateral Highway, which is proposed to strengthen regional trade and connectivity. So in the next section, I have evaluated the state of the investments and the challenges and the issues they are facing. So the Kaladan project has been facing security concerns. Although the Sitwe port, which is under this project, has been operationalized and is under control, other segments of the project are delayed because of land disputes, coordination failures, and security concerns, particularly from the Arakan army controlling key project areas. The next one is the India-Myanmar-Thailand Trilateral Highway. This highway is 70% complete, but it has been plagued by terrain challenges, high costs, and bureaucratic delays. The Kaleva-Yagi stretch faces steep gradients, which is increasing construction difficulties. The Shui Gas project has an investment of about $722 million by ONGC Videsh, and an additional $121.27 million has been at least approved for investment, and this has been approved by the Cabinet Committee on Economic Affairs. So the project is established near the Rakhine state. It is operational, but again, it faces risk because of Myanmar's political instability and because of the growing international pressure on foreign companies doing business in the region. From all of these developments, there are some broad trends which we can identify. The first is that there's an obvious security risk from the ongoing civil war, insurgent activities. And this is the instability also being created by the insurgent groups on the border who do create instability in India. And these groups are being co-opted by the Tatmadaw because they help them in their fight against the rebel groups in Myanmar. And because of the security concerns, it obviously results in financial and logistical setbacks, which is impacting cost efficiency and project timelines. A disturbing trend is also foreign disinvestment, as we can see in the exit of Adani Group and Chevron and POSCO and many other companies. And so this raises concerns about long-term investment sustainability. And the fourth is obviously China's growing influence in Myanmar, which complicates our strategic position. So if we conduct a impact assessment, we can conclude that the 2021 military coup and the ongoing civil war has disrupted investments and connectivity efforts. And because of instances of abduction of Indian workers by the Arakan army in 2019, and so on and so forth, security concerns have dominated India's approach towards Myanmar, and this is overshadowing our economic cooperation with them, which includes trade and infrastructure. Border instability is impacting physical cross-border trade via the Mure-Tamu corridor, and obviously international pressure has led companies to withdraw, which is raising risks for future Indian investments. But to do a sort of course correction, India must modify its strategy by balancing its security, trade, and diplomatic engagement by undertaking the following. We need to diplomatically engage with all stakeholders, including the ethnic armed groups, along with outreach towards the national unity government in exile. We obviously need to enhance our project security so that we can ensure its completion. And I think the third is the most important point, which is diversified investments to strengthen economic ties. And I think we need to move beyond infrastructure and connectivity and energy, because I saw a video during the research process where there was a research analyst from Myanmar, and she had come to Mumbai for a conference, and she basically said that they see India as a major trade partner, but not as a major investment partner. And that label is basically restricted to China, that China is a major investment in investing partner. So I think we need to invest in establishing factories that produce primary raw materials or other products and that create employment on ground, and in reality and perceptively at least ensure that the Myanmar people believe that India is a serious investor. In conclusion, potential elections in 2025 could offer opportunities for renewed engagement, considering the improved security atmosphere in India's northeastern states and the recent ceasefire announced between minority armed groups and Tatmadaw. India's infrastructure projects in Myanmar can resume with greater pace, ensuring our commitment remains strong towards fostering regional connectivity, strategic interests, and economic cooperation. With that, I conclude my presentation.
Thank you, Swati. Now we can have 2 to 3 rounds of questionnaire. Yeah. We have discussants as well. First one is Sindhuja from Department of Defense and Strategic Studies, SRM Institute of Science and Technology, and Esther from Department of International Relations, Maharajas College. You guys can start. You have 3 minutes.
Okay. My greetings to everyone. I am Sindhuja Rajendran from SRM Institute of Science and Technology, Tamil Nadu. My background is I'm a final year UG student. I'm pursuing BSc Defense and Strategic Studies. My first question is to Pragya Thakur. Why has Asian's 5 points consensus failed to produce targeted results in Myanmar? What alternative mechanism should ASEAN consider? At what point should ASEAN consider suspending Myanmar membership? Would this force the junta to negotiate or simply isolate Myanmar further? And then I need to move on to Anu Maria Joseph. And everyone's presentation was very great. My question is, how do the roles of regional and international actors differ in the cases of Myanmar and Sudan? Would Myanmar's ethnic armed organization eventually plays role in similar to Sudan's various rebel groups in responding governance? Is my question to Anu Maria. Then I'm moving to Devika. I was Very grateful to listen your presentation. It was very great. My question to you is, what are the unintended consequences of sanctions on Myanmar's civilian population and economy? You mentioned many points about this and even about the military and political points about the interference of Russia and China. So that I need to mention one more question about that. How sanctions against Myanmar's military is being effective in influencing political changes, or have they pushed the regimes closer to China and Russia? My last question is to Swati Sur, I think. If I'm wrong, I apologize for that. Okay. How do you assess the long-term sustainability of India's infrastructure projects in Myanmar, especially in light of political instability? And you mentioned many points about India and China's influence in the economical development and involvement in Myanmar. So the next question is, can India's investment in Myanmar contribute to broader regional security, or does it risk entrenchment in internal conflicts? Do I need to come again, Swati?
No, the question is clear. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. That's all. Thank you for the opportunity. Thank you, sir. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, everyone.
Can you repeat the last part of the question, please?
Ma'am?
Could you repeat the last part of the first question that you asked me? I'm Pragya.
Okay. At what point should Asians consider suspending Myanmar's membership? Would this force the junta to negotiate or simply isolate Myanmar further? Do I need to come again?
No, it's good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, Esther, you can start.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Esther. I'm from the Department of International Relations, University of Mysore. Very good presentation to all the presenters. You guys really did well. I'll start with Pragya. You spoke on Asian and Myanmar limitation and regional approach. That was a good presentation. You touched most of the things, but my question is this: can ASEAN really bring peace and stability in Myanmar, or do they need to involve other stakeholders in order to bring peace and stability to the region? Then for Anu Maria, next presentation, you try to draw a trajectory, similarity between Sudan war, which is a different continent, and here in Asia, Myanmar conflict. That was nice presentation. So I can't find my question for you. I'll get back to you. But for Devika, also nice presentation. But we have seen that most of the sanctions that has been imposed in Myanmar has led to more economic instability and illegal businesses. So is there other way that they can use to stabilize this? Sorry, let me rephrase. Is there a way, apart from sanction from the West, that this conflict can be curtailed? Or is it just by sanctions? Because we can see that the sanctions are not clearly working, and they have backings of other major powers. So is there other way? And sorry for Swati. Nice presentation, but I do not have questions for you.
Okay, let's get the answers for these, and then we'll open the floor for questions. More questions.
Yeah. Okay. So I would like to answer all of it in one go. So the first, I would start with how can ASEAN really bring peace in the region or not? So ASEAN has its own limitations while answering, while doing its job. So the basic thing is the 5-point consensus that it follows, which means that it has to maintain the sovereignty of every individual nation. So it cannot go beyond its reach, or it cannot, do the secession with any other country, or it can put pressure to other countries, or especially to Myanmar to some extent. But as long as Myanmar will keep taking help from some other external support from countries like China or some other countries, till then I don't think that ASEAN can exactly bring peace in that region. And again, for the alternative measures, same to ASEAN, China has been working as an alternative measure to ASEAN. So because of that, ASEAN has been like, redundant in matter of resolving the conflict of Myanmar. And if too much pressure is applied to Myanmar from ASEAN, it would rather be isolated or not isolated, but it will turn its face towards China because it has been helping it as a backbone. So I think that's pretty much it.
Anu?
Thank you. About the question on the role of international and regional organizations, how is it different in Sudan and Myanmar? I think compared to Myanmar, international actors have a better say and better influence in Sudan, mainly because Sudan is completely dependent on humanitarian aid across the country. So they have to adhere to some kind of restrictions and pressure from the international organizations and actors. But despite this, the international actors' efforts have been unsuccessful. There were around 9 to 10 ceasefire efforts, which all of them failed just because of one reason, that both of the warring parties, even though they commit to the efforts, they never comply to any of the agreements that they reach upon. Second question on how the ethnic armed organizations are different in Sudan and Myanmar. When it comes to Sudan, there are two main divisions, which is the Arab groups and the non-Arab groups. And the Arab groups align with the Rapid Support Forces, which was actually created by the Omar al-Bashir during his regime. And it was previously known as the Janjaweed militia, who carried out the Darfur genocide in 2004 against the non-Arab Darfur community. And the other non-Arab groups are aligning with the SAF, Sudanese Armed Forces. So if you look at Myanmar, the EAOs, ethnic armed organizations, are separate, and they even though they collaborate with NUG and PDF, they are separate, and they have different vision of having an autonomy. So I think that is the main difference between ethnic armed organizations in Sudan and Myanmar.
Thank you for all your suggestions and the questions. First, I'll answer Sindhuja's question. It's about how the Western, what is it called, isolation from the West, or does the sanctions create closer regard to Russia and China? So for that question, I would like to say yes, it's just my opinion. Considering the fact that what happens to the sanction is that these sanctions imposed to these countries led to, as I mentioned, not just illegal trade or illegal connections, but also it gets more closer to both Russia and China. For example, I mentioned about how the United Nations called upon for this particular sanction, but Russia and China has the veto to, not to say that. And apart from that, the trade routes or any of the diplomatic relations that the Myanmar should go is through Russia and China. So if the sanctions are removed, obviously they get more closer to Russia and China. Considering the second question, is there any other way to your question, Esther's answer? So is there any other way other than the sanctions? First, I would say that rather than having a cultural or a religious, identity, the nation should altogether focus on the national identity, because at the end of the day, this is the last presentation. So at the end of the day, the Myanmar should at least now should go for national identity rather than religious or cultural or ethnic identity. Second, I would say there should be improving or expanding the multilateral efforts with, for example, I know ASEAN has limitations, but with ASEAN, India, and Japan, they have the capacity to at least limit the Hyundai's trade in diplomatic space. And then support from civil resistance or pro-democratic methods would definitely help to reduce this.
Thank you. Swati, on to you.
Right, thank you. So thank you, Sindhuja, for your question and suggestions. I think your first question was about the long-term sustainability of Indian projects. So as of now, it looks bleak because of intense lobbying by human rights groups and the security concerns. And I think a way we can improve the situation is by engaging with all stakeholders to achieve consensus regarding security of Indian infrastructure projects. And your second question was about, can India's investment contribute to broader regional security or will it result in entrenchment in the civil conflict? So I believe it would contribute to neither of the cases. I feel that I've also highlighted this in my paper, is that there is a network of international agreements that guide India's economic cooperation with Myanmar, but there is a very concerted effort by both the governments to keep it restricted at a bilateral level, because we wanted to be we wanted to be progress at a further level. So it's not so much at the multilateral level as much as it is at the bilateral. So I feel it won't contribute to neither of the cases.
Thank you, Swati. We can open the questionnaire round. Chetan, you can ask your question. And then Aprupa.
Thank you, panelists, for all the great presentations. I have questions for all the presenters. I'll start with Pragya. Um, it was a great presentation, especially looking at the role that ASEAN plays in the current conflict. But when we are talking about regional approaches and its limitations, I think your presentation can benefit if we can do a comparative analysis as to how ASEAN operated at the turn of the century, 1990s and early 2000s, as to what was the role that was played by ASEAN, why was it relatively more successful than it is now, because the institutional limitations are the same that existed then and which exist now, right? So what has changed, whether it's the initiative of certain polar countries like Malaysia and Indonesia, which were really active earlier and not are probably not as active today. So what are the factors that are driving the changes in these two scenarios, right? So maybe a comparative analysis that will help. Also, in one of your last slides, when you were talking about potential trajectories, you're talking about collaboration with the UN, and how maybe internationalizing the whole issue might help ASEAN. But I think that almost goes against the spirit of the ASEAN way, which would like to keep it a regional issue, would like to maintain non-interference and building a consensus way approach, right? So that almost goes against the spirit and the approach of ASEAN. So what's your take on that? Going on to Anu Maria Joseph's presentation on Sudan and drawing parallels with Myanmar, which was a very interesting way to look at the whole situation. Kudos to you. My only it's not even a question, it's really uh, food for thought. There was one slide where you were talking about converging trends between the two crises. Would it, and as someone who's just read about Myanmar and not so much about Sudan, would it also benefit to talk about the colonial histories of these two countries? Because I think that would, at least in the case of Myanmar, makes a lot of sense as to why institutions have failed, why the military has dominated for decades, and why there are ethnic conflicts. Because there's an inherent ontological security in the state of Myanmar, right? So maybe looking or connecting all these points with the colonial history make sense for your paper. Right. Moving on to Devika's presentation. Devika, like when we're talking about the efficacy of international sanctions, I think one thing you could have done is that expanded on the different sanctions that have been imposed or the different nature of these sanctions, because the efficacy of sanctions depends on the dependencies, right? So, and the sanctions have been largely placed by the US and the European Union. So, were there any great dependencies between US and Myanmar, European Union and Myanmar before the coup that these states expected these sanctions to be effective in the first place, right? So, what were the level of trades or the different sanctions that have imposed and whatever curves that they have created? What were the dependencies before the sanctions and today, right? So, maybe an analysis of that. And yeah, moving on to Swati. Again, great presentation, especially when talking about India's approach to Myanmar, especially when it concerns regarding investment. I would only say is that when we're talking about India's approach to Myanmar, we should not ignore the role of northeastern states, especially Nagaland and Manipur. That the union government, on one hand, has blamed Myanmar and the refugees coming in for the crisis in Manipur, right? Whereas the reality on ground is very different, and the free movement regime has been suspended as well. So the contestation of what should be the approach to Myanmar. There's a contestation between the union government as well as the state government and the local communities, right? So how does that play out? And also, we cannot ignore that India has also been one of the largest suppliers of arms and weapons to Myanmar during since the coup, right? So how does that play out in the broader scheme of India's approach to Myanmar? These are my questions and suggestions. Thank you for all the great presentations.
Thank you, Chetan. Aprupa, you can ask your questions.
Thank you so much. And I will start with Pragya. Pragya, I'm sorry I missed your presentation, but I did. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. But I did, get certain points that while you were answering. Pragya, one thing is about ASEAN is that, what I hear, in fact, from your answer about isolation also, ASEAN as an institution doesn't work individually. It's very much dependent on its members. And these members have lost a lot of their own stake with China themselves. So that is another point I would like you to be, pointing out, like how do you think they will act? Like they're politically so much of involvement with any of these ASEAN, most of these ASEAN members like have high stake with their investments and other things in China. So China does have a string when it comes to ASEAN way of looking into Myanmar also. My second question, more than question, Anu, I have two technical things. One is that, yeah, you in your, in your that, uh, what is it called? That where you have grouped them, you mentioned democracy from 2011. Even democracy was there in Myanmar previous 1962 also, where you have drawn the, uh, where you, so you didn't mention that. So that's something I wanted to, like, there was democracy prior to 2021 also, although unstable, but in the name of it, it was there. And Anu, another thing is that I was expecting more that where you, as your title said, drawing parallel, I was expecting how you draw a parallel from the, the different conflict perspective from Sudan when it comes to Myanmar. But it's from your presentation, I found it was more about talking about the similarities, and that was what I found in the issues also. Like in your trajectory, I got more answers from you than your issues. Like your issues seem more like a comparative analysis, focusing more on the similarities of the both these countries rather than where you draw a parallel, which is what I was looking forward and very keen to listen from you. And next, I have question for somebody. I forgot your name, sorry. The one you spoke about sanctions, and sanctions. You did. I understand for the for the requirement, but sanctions not new to Myanmar. Sanction has been present before the coup also. Myanmar has seen sanctions since 1960s onwards, late 60s onwards. So how is it making a difference? Like adding up to Chetan's question, does most of these Myanmar, not only the government, the more than the government when it comes to Myanmar, this is something that plays a role with China also. It's always also about the, how much stake the junta officials have, the higher officials have. They don't have much of a stake with, it's not no loss for them, even if the sanction doesn't affect them. So how does it affect the country? The sanction affects common people. Okay, so how is it making a difference? With last presentation, Swati, you rightly pointed out a lot of things, but the thing is that, in fact, a lot of the projects in India, Indian projects, should have finished. The deadline was even prior to the coup. So another major problem when it comes to the Indian investments and the Indian, when it comes to Myanmar, was also the delay. Like these projects were supposed to be finished long before the coup. Some of them deadlines were in 2019. So even if there is a peace, like I'm talking about a utopian scenario here, if there is a peace and things work out, how confident are you that these projects will be fruitful, and how, because India has been blamed, your anecdote also emphasized on it, that India has been blamed about the same thing, about the investments. That one of the reasons Myanmar doesn't depend on India much is because of the delays in projects. I want to know more about it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Arupa. Do we have any more questions? Vaishak?
Okay. Hi everybody. My name is Vaishak. I have three questions. The first one is for Pragya. Pragya, in your presentation, you talked about how there can often sometimes be disagreement within the ASEAN countries themselves. So I wanted to ask you, uh, are the interests of different ASEAN countries for Myanmar different in the sense that, let's say, the neighboring countries like Laos, Cambodia, Thailand, their number one problem to solve might be, let's say, the problems with the Golden Triangle or drug trafficking or things of that sort. While countries that are a little bit farther away, like Indonesia, their interest might be in solving refugee crisis. So, what is the conversation within ASEAN about that? That is to Pragya. Then to Anu. Anu, as I was listening to your presentations, is more of a curiosity than a question. That when these military coups happen, where does the funding come from? For Myanmar government at least, other than the large national fund that they get from the government, they have an entire private economy and a private business that they run, that they get their funding from. Is there something like that in Sudan, or is it an external actor? That is to Anu. Then to Devika. Devika, my question is, like Apurva had mentioned, how the sanctions are affecting the common people in sense of I think you can mention the higher inflation rates, how the local currency is doing, and how it has affected trade. And in terms of trade also, has the sanctions led to any kind of a boom in the black market trade that happens within or around the borders of Myanmar? And yeah, that's it.
Thank you, Vaishak.
So, first, reflecting on Anu Maria's presentation, I would like to do a small rectification in the PPT. The part you mentioned, the ethnic organizations, you have interchanged Sudan and Myanmar.
Yeah, you did
Myanmar, you have written the Darfur and all, and in Sudan you have written the Rakhine and all. And just one more curiosity is that you said that in the part of failed institutions, in the both the part, Sudan and Myanmar. So as they have kind of similar issues, can both the countries come together for a policy dialogue in any way to kind of reflect on their internal crisis? And my second question to Devika, how do the internal actors in the Myanmar, such as the civilians and the ethnic armed organizations, perceive the sanctions? How do the sanctions affect them, and how do they perceive those sanctions? And to my third question is to Swati Sur. And you mentioned about the India, Myanmar, Thailand trilateral highway. Other than this highway project or anything, how can Thailand and India work together? What other projects or in what other fields or sectors can India and Thailand work together for the betterment of the situation in Myanmar? That's it.
Okay, thank you, Ashutosh. We can hold on to the questions now. We can start answering. Pragya.
We have time to get all the questions. One more, three more questions.
Okay, we'll start with Abhiruchi.
So my question is for Anu. So you identified four converging factors. My question is, what makes these two cases, Sudan and Myanmar, unique that you combined into and saw the parallels or similarity, which is, I mean, why not other civil military conflicts? I think the four factors, the converging factors you had mentioned, I think as far as I can imagine, in every civil military conflict, these would be the factors. So what makes the case of Sudan and Myanmar unique that you chose?
I'll due to the paucity of time, I'll just limit my question to two people. My first question is to Anu. Two questions. First one is you talked about how external actors have influenced this conflict. Simple question. You just mentioned how they are providing arms and ammunition. I just want to know in what other capacity they are influencing this internal civil military conflict in Sudan and Myanmar. How so you only mentioned that they're providing arms and ammunition, the external actors. In what other capacity are they? Okay. And my second question is a disagreement to a point that you made in your convergence, where you said that there is a lack of inclusive governance by the military regime that's there. Inclusive governance is a privilege that comes when there is a normal or a stable government. We are talking about conflicts here. It is not a normal government. So I do not think that we can, because when you go for a coup, you do not want to be inclusive, right? You do not care about governance, right? So I disagree when you said that there is a lack of inclusive governance, because there shouldn't be, because in the first place they went for coup. That was never their goal. So this can't be brought into a convergence or a point here, because coups don't look for inclusivity, or not coups. An authoritarian regime that comes after a coup does not look for an inclusive does not look for inclusive governance. Okay, I'll be talking.
So I have just one clarification from David. You mentioned about the four-cut strategy. So did you mention it as a sanctions?
No.
You mentioned it as one of the pressure tactics of junta over the civilians, or it is on the rebel groups? Because
Can you just explain something?
because I'm asking about the four-cut strategy you were talking about. So you said that it's a pressure. First clarification that I wanted, that did you?
It's on the pressure on the UNA, not just the not the humanitarian.
Okay, so I'll start with Chetan. So you were talking about me giving a comparative analysis, but if I would have done that, the presentation would have been longer, and I didn't have that much time, so I couldn't do it. But maybe I'll do that in the paper. And to answer your second question, the goal is to help Myanmar and not ASEAN as a whole. So the main focus is to solve the Myanmar's issue and to bring regional stability. Because if the interference make things better for ASEAN, for Myanmar, so other things will fall in line and ASEAN will do better as well. So I think that ASEAN will have to take a stronger stance and will have to change its ways a little bit and take help from the UN or other external forces as well. And moving on to Aparupa's question, sorry. So that you were saying about the interest of the member countries of ASEAN with China. So, so ASEAN works according to like the interest of its member countries, and they cannot come to a united front because the countries have different interest and different kind of relationship with China. So it can work in the interest of ASEAN as a whole, but it does not, because let's take the example of Indonesia, Malaysia, and Singapore, which are against the junta rule. And if you look at Thailand, Cambodia, and Laos, they have closer ties with China, but they are also getting affected by the border issues. And Vietnam and Philippines are also there, which have their own problems in the South China Sea. So it's very scattered. So they cannot come to a particular point of unity and work towards a single goal.
No, Pragya, I think you got my question wrong. What you just said, that was my statement, that this is the scenario. Then how do you think ASEAN will work? Because ASEAN as an organization, as an institution, is dependent on the members, right? And these members have large stake in China. China is pulling the thread. So how do you think, despite the members, personal political relationship with China, they will come out of it and work for the benefit of Myanmar? That's what I'm saying.
So I think that if these member countries are not taking help from China and going to some other like taking support from other external actors, that's the I feel that is the only way that they can help Myanmar. And firstly, they would have to resolve their own disputes, because almost all the ASEAN countries have their own problems with China or their internal government or internal politics. So they'll have to get through that first and then come and work together in ASEAN, I believe. And yeah, last question was for Vaishak. So about the internal problems in the country. So there are a lot of internal problems. So the major ones are the economic disparities, which leads to trade policy, trade problems. Because there are countries like Singapore, which is very high in money matters, or you can say high income country. But as well as they have the countries which are very poor, for example, Laos or Cambodia. So that is also there, and then they have South China Sea disputes. So they are stuck there, and they have to deal with their own problems first. And then Thailand and Cambodia have their border issues. Philippines have South China Sea issue with China, and Indonesia and Cambodia have their own border issues. So there are a lot of issues there. So yeah.
I will just quickly answer almost all the questions. Chetan, thank you for your input. I totally agree with you that colonial history of both countries does have a role in all these crises that has been facing. Coming to Aprupa, I totally agree with you. I got diverted from drawing. I was looking at to draw parallels from Myanmar compared with Sudan. Then I found similar issues. Then I went into issues, and I totally diverted from issues to drawing parallels. I'm still confused as well. I will look up onto it. For Vaishak's question on funding for coups, as far as I know, RSF and SAF has a lot of control over natural resources and mining industries, mining regions, areas in Sudan. That's one of the sources. Other than that, I'm not sure. That's answer for you. Why Sudan and okay, why did I select Sudan and Myanmar? I have been following Sudan for a long time, and then I came, since we are focusing on Myanmar. When I was reading about Myanmar, I found so many similarities in terms of developments, and I felt like this is the best that I could draw parallels. And I'm not sure. Can you tell me another country who is going through similar converging points? Then I will agree with you on it. You can get back to me later. And what other capacity? I think other than I can answer in terms of Sudan. I don't think in any other capacity, any international actors are supporting Sudan, either of the warring parties. And your point on lack of inclusiveness, I totally disagree with you, because this lack of inclusiveness is present even when it's a military regime or a civilian government. And that lack of inclusiveness is one of the major reasons why these ethnic conflicts are unfolding in Sudan and also in Myanmar. So I don't think so. It's not related to coup. It's historical, and it existed even when it's civilian government or a military government.
But you are presenting on the ongoing civil conflict.
No. It's not about the civilian conflict. There is military regime, then civilian transition, then again military regime. The whole process.
But if you're drawing parallels with Myanmar, you are not looking into the history, right? You are just looking into the conflict.
No. You didn't understand. Yeah, I will talk to you later.
Okay,
Yeah. Thank you so much for your suggestions and inputs. I'll humanitarian aspect and sense of how it affects the humans. I'll just add that in my paper. And regarding the sanctions imposition on how it changes from time to time. I'll take an example of European Union, for instance, from the initial sanctions of 1996. It was just arms embargo, travel restrictions, and suspension of high-level bilateral government visit. Then there was lifting of sanction in 2013, and then strengthening of measures in 2018, and post-coup sanctions, that is, which has targeted the military regime, and those travel bans, asset freezes, prohibition of making funds, there was export bans on dual-use goods, equipment on international repression. So there was an expansion of this particular. First, it was only against the human rights. Now it got extended to the what is it called, the migration and the people. So that's why the sanctions from the 1996 to 2021 to present is changing. And to respond the Vaishak's question, it's about how is there any black market trade? Because humanitarian, I told I'll add it. That suggestion I'll add it. And when it comes to black market and trade, they were exploiting the junta, which was exploiting the natural resources like jade, timber, oil, and gas. And they were using with broader regions like China's Yunnan province in Thailand, which provides an alternative to formal economic channels. So because of these sanctions, these are the black markets which was involved in that. I hope I answered your question. Thank you so much.
And small other suggestions to Anu Maria and for everyone. While selecting the issues and areas, you took in like Myanmar and Sudan. Instead of going to Sudan, you take similar Asian countries, South Asian countries. Like it will help to do more research on that. It will help you to come up with a more effective finding. That's what I felt. The Sudan there and Myanmar is here. Somewhere, I think it will not be more effective. You can't do that. You can't focus more on these issues. It will not be helpful to Myanmar or any Asian countries. Right? Okay, thank you.
Okay, Swati, you can answer your questions.
Right. So thank you everyone for your suggestion and inputs. I think the first question / suggestion was by Chetan. It was about exploring the dynamics within the northeastern states, particularly Nagaland and Manipur, how it's impacting the cross-border trade. And I think there was also suspension of free movement regime. So I definitely agree with your suggestion. I'll explore it in more detail, though I have explored the northeastern part. And I think your second point was about union government, state government, and local communities, the dynamics between the three and how it's going to affect the investments. I feel it's deviating from the research question in the sense how I understand that it's very fragmented and that the insurgent groups and this even though free movement regime has been suspended, there is constant to and fro between both the countries. But I feel when we involve union government, state government, and local communities in the northeast, I feel it's just very inward looking, so I don't think I'll include that. I think the second question was about how there have been delays before the coup and how confident I am about the completion of the project. So if things prevail status quo, I'm not very confident about the completion of the project. However, if we course correct and if we achieve security of the infrastructure projects by diplomatically engaging with the stakeholders, then there is a high chance of them being completed. And then I think the third question was by Ashutosh, and it was about how Thailand and India can work for the betterment of Myanmar. So I don't think that we can bypass Myanmar in any way and do a project that brings them any benefit. We certainly have to involve them as an equal partner, so that way we can explore projects in the maritime sector. Because the Shui gas project has been successful that way, so we have precedents. So the maritime sector does provide some sort of security, and I think all the three countries can explore opportunities there.
Well, I thank you, Swati, for your presentation. Your presentation was good, and I think we can conclude this session. And thank you all for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you, Fleur, for conducting this session. Let me also thank those who have joined online for being with us this evening. We will move to the last session of the 2 days conclave. So thank you to all those who have joined online. We'll write to you. We'll keep in touch. Yeah. We will try to finalize, Swati, Chetan and Aprupa will be in touch, yeah? Okay, we'll bring this session to an end, online session. Thank you all. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, good.